Well, I just want to say thank you all for coming. My name is Gregory Jenkins, and I am with the Somerville Arts Council. And you are here for this second sort of meeting that we've done within the city. Who's here as our host too is Kristen Selgis, who's involved with Somerset. Some of you may know her. She was a CPA director, has been sort of our analyst and sort of liaison to the mayor's office for a number of years. And Kristen's got a great background with the Packer Foundation and doing different kind of work. And she's been a great advocate for the Arts Council as a department, as well as, for the arts community. And she's helping us out on a lot of this work. And Dan Moore is in the black down below, but he's been great helping us deal with Zoom and various new technologies as we move from GoToMeeting to Zoom to GoToWebinar, and Dan's been great. But so this is the second meeting, and it is a meeting that the community sort of wanted to know more about as it relates to cultural planning. What I hope is that we'll be here for maybe around an hour and 15 minutes, and it shouldn't hopefully take up all evening. But one, you're all here because you're interested. You're all here hopefully because you're also advocates and artists and in the community and supporting the arts community and all the work that you do. I appreciate it a lot. And hopefully by the time we start rolling this cultural planning process out more in the spring, we'll all be able to hopefully meet together. But here's the, the agenda, basically this, short presentation. Whether or not you know it or not, we're really going to sort of do these breakout rooms with all of you. Hopefully you'll want to participate. And then we'll have sort of, a time and a period where we'll be reporting back, and we'll have another ample time for more questions and answers. But this is kind of the agenda. It's very much focused on, there's also some of our board members are here. I don't know necessarily within the chat. Some of them are going to be helping, both board and staff and people in the community are going to be helping with the breakout rooms too. And I won't get too far caught up in that, but let me just go through this. So based on the last meeting that we had, and it wasn't that long ago, it was sort of in September, the community advocated for more funding to help deal with our crisis situation during COVID. And I think a lot of you know that, we've put out 3 different types of grants as it relates to this COVID related funding. One was grants to cultural organizations, essentially to help them get over a plan and think about work that they can do, or just get them out of a hole in terms of rent or back wages and things like that. Those went out and they were due, and we are in the process of trying to distribute that. We also did one specifically for the BIPOC community, and the applications were due a couple weeks ago. Our jury's still reviewing them. If anybody's applied for those, hopefully, by next Monday, we'll have the panel recommendations back from that. And I think a lot of you know this, and if you don't, please spread the word that our final one is basically an allocation of, towards regular individual artists. So any individual artist in the Somerville community that has lost wages due to COVID, needs a little bit of additional money. We are going to release approximately, $200,000 for that category as well. This is a little bit more about the breakdown again. So in total, we're releasing around $620,000 just within the COVID grant money in these last 3 categories, which is really, really great. And it's good that we can get this money out to the community. I think a lot of you know, many of you are board members or have been recipients of our local cultural council. We are, those applications are out there now. It's very much a forward-thinking thing. The COVID money, even though the deadline coming up for individuals is pretty soon, the COVID grant, this deadline may change. The MCC just announced or reached out to us a couple of days ago saying that a lot of people in smaller communities are having a trouble, getting the process up and going. This deadline may shift to December, but regardless, start thinking about things that you might want to do. We're still going to be doing fellowships like we always do. We still are going to be doing project grants. But think about this work in relationship to like maybe what you'd like to do in the spring, next summer, next fall. I know we still don't necessarily know what we're going to be doing. I would say in relationship to COVID, but what I would say, or we get a lot of emails, think about what you'd like to do in terms of if it's a project-oriented thing that you could do in normal times. And if we have to readjust or recalibrate, just like we've been doing from the past LCC grants this past year, a lot of people are doing virtual things. A lot of people are changing their applications. I would say, apply, put in what you think you're wanting to do next year. And that's the point of that money as well. So I think you all know the mayor was in the previous meeting talking about additional support that the city has. I think a lot of you know that, hopefully you know about this in terms of the coronavirus help sort of URL. The city still is issuing, mortgage and rental utility assistance, mental health resources, different types of unemployment insurance. So if there are certain things that you are in need of, you should reach out, to the city and specifically through this portal here. Or you can always call 311 as well. And the team there can help, direct your call or direct your, email as well. You can always send it to 311@somervillema.gov as well. That's a good way of just sending an email to the city. So the one thing that came up, and we talked about this briefly last time, but we sort of kept this kind of series of slides in here. And I think it's really important, we may have new people here that weren't in the last meeting. There may be new people that don't even know about the Somerville Arts Council and are coming to this meeting now. But I sort of look at cultural planning in the same vein as sort of the work that we've been doing as a community, especially around cultural infrastructure. And I think if any of you know, I've just been I myself, a lot of other people have been dogged around issues of infrastructure, around zoning, around certain things that we hope, will continuously, create a more sort of a positive, a more stable infrastructure for the city's, for the city's cultural scene. As you know, Art Farm has been in the works, and we all know this. It's been discussed. Kristen's been involved since the very beginning with CPA money allocations. I think of, Susan Bursler, who's here, Peter Marquez, a ton of people in the community, the Brick Bottom community have been pushing for Art Farm. It's down at the former waste transfer site. We are still pushing for this. I think you all as a community need to make sure that, when you reach out and talk to city councilors, keep it in front of their minds. There's nothing wrong with that. We're still slated to do this. We're at design development. It's pretty much done. We're just trying to align it more with the pump house at this point, but it's still a project that's is moving forward. And it will have approximately around a 5,500 square foot sort of barn, a performance area, a plaza, open space to be able to do a lot of different work, whether it's, outside, craft markets, outside performances. It'll have an amazing, park, and an amazing addition in terms of design for the whole sort of brick bottom area. So zoning and the arts, I think, many of you have heard me talk about this and have been talking about it since probably 2005 with, the creation of that arts overlay district in Union Square, which helped, get arts and zoning on the map. But also in 2019, just this past December, new zoning was, rolled out. And within certain zones, mid-rise, commercial, fabrication districts, there is basically a 5% arts and creative use category that's designated for that. In Boynton Yards, there's upwards of 10% within the overlay district. And what we've done is, and Kristen is involved with this as well, next Monday, we're rolling out, our first meeting with a creative space task force to start to look at recommendations to basically provide more detail in this zoning. So, if it says 10% is going towards arts and cultural uses. What does that mean? How is that going to play out? Lots of details that basically have to be, discussed more. We're fortunate in that the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, our Planning Council, is, helping us with this task force. They're providing technical assistance, again, looking at issues of challenges in terms of spaces, opportunities, how to stabilize creative spaces. It pretty much says that. But and artist housing, out of that, 2005 zoning work, I can tell you, I again, I can think of all the people that were involved, when the building that's the storage building, when back in the 2000s, that basically everybody was wanting to create artist lofts, and there wasn't specific zoning and guidelines behind that. And luckily, the community sort of called them out and said, just because it's within this fabrication zone and you call it an artist loft space doesn't mean it's for artists. So out of that, again, the advocacy that you all did, the advocacy from the council, we basically refined what is artist uses. We created an artist certification process. So if somebody claims they're going to do artist housing, that there's a certification process, there's a process by which artist housing will be built. And, have we created a ton of it? No, but truth be told, just in the past 4 or 5 years, we've got roughly around 13 units that are designated and dedicated to the artist community. So it's a positive for all of your, the work that you've done. Nibble Kitchen, a little bit of, a plug on this. We were fortunate to get, city council funding, a little bit of money, like around 60,000 and then, or 200,000. And then we also got money from Mass Development to build out our kitchen. And it's very much there as a part of an infrastructure to work with immigrant entrepreneurs. But it is an infrastructure for the community that's, that's solid and it's there. So I put that in context in the sense of saying, thinking about, what is a cultural plan and why do we need a cultural plan? And again, for tonight, what we really want to do is go through this sort of exercise of trying to get feedback from you about, the need for a cultural plan. What are the types of processes that we might be exploring in a cultural planning process? But then couching this cultural plan, obviously, in the assets of what we already have, right? We know we have a wealth of individual artists in the community. We know we probably have a deficit in the sense of, maybe we need more expansive, gallery spaces, more expansive types of places, performance spaces for people to perform. But what is it about a cultural plan where we as a community can say 10 years from now, we would like to get to X or we would like to get to Y? And that's kind of what we're here tonight, is just to discuss this kind of cultural planning process. And if you think about it, a lot of these plans are obviously about, strengthening existing assets and formalizing new partnerships, minimizing deficits, increasing community, city support, community support, and ultimately frame arts and cultural issues like in the future. All the plans, whether in Boston, Boston did a planning process. Some of you may have participated. I think Ava's here from the Boston Foundation. I think she's here. Was very much involved with the Boston Creates plan. And a lot of these plans, you see very similar language, inclusive, engaging residents about culture and identifying, opportunities and resources, how to achieve those goals. A cultural plan is in a way no different than a lot of the planning work that the city's already done through summer vision or through the neighborhood plans. What we hope is that this cultural plan, if I'm going to get involved with it, what I really want is not just visions and values, but I want some, specific things to say, here are the outcomes and here are the paths, right, of how we're going to get there as a community. And ultimately, this is the Boston plan. Some of you, again, it was launched in 2015. If you look at this timeline, some of the feedback too is that it went on for around 18 months. Tons and tons of conversations, tons of different breakout sessions and surveys and all sorts of things. I mean, I don't think that we need to like envision, an 18-month plan, but some communities do that. Chicago, I mean, the interesting thing is that the director of Chicago, remember, she was in Chicago and then came to Somerville, but their plan ultimately, I mean, was very much involved within economic development in their cultural affairs program as well. But again, I mean, they created these kinds of things of plans, categories, priorities, recommendations, initiatives. You see this sort of info chart. But this is typical of sort of the cultural planning process. Austin, a lot of you know Austin. Austin's plan was kind of interesting in that, again, is a typical plan, but then what came out of it is that they ended up doing different plans. I think a lot of you know South by Southwest. It's a huge music, convening. Out of that plan, they created a year later, they created one specifically on, music and the ecosystem for Austin's, music scene. So, I mean, there's different ways in which
do you want me to talk to him?
Look at that. So, so what's next? I'm running through here. So the point of tonight is to think about this, and we're doing pretty good with time. What we'd like to do is create some breakout rooms in Zoom, and Dan is going to help us. We have these specific topics that we're basically posing to people to think about. If you want to go into one of these rooms and have discussions that are ultimately about within a cultural plan or within, the community, what does it mean for, to have a robust performing arts facilities? What does it mean to have, how does public art envision itself within a cultural plan within the city? Music, venues, space opportunities. That's a little bit broad, but it's more about sort of spaces that potentially could help support music or to help support other types of activities, right? Production versus dissemination, I threw out as a category because, after so many years, we produce a lot, but then typically, dancers go to Cambridge or dancers go to Boston to get their work out. Or, if you're a sculptor and you do work at Vernon Street, you might also be joining the Boston Sculptures Gallery, right? To make sure that you have a better venue to be able to exhibit your work. Or even down in, the SOWA area in terms of the drawing room or different types of gallery spaces. So I've always been intrigued by Somerville's own dichotomy of like how much we produce, but yet how much we also, how do we disseminate and how do we get our work out, right? And again, what this exercise is about is really just thinking, and I'm going to go up here, the exercise in a way is just more to have us start to think about what's the praxis by which we might be doing, a cultural plan. What are these types of exercises that we want to be doing to get at assets, to think about how we strengthen, music within the community, what types of partnerships we need to do, and thinking about what's missing, right? And in a way, we're not doing this to solve a bunch of problems tonight. We're just merely trying to do this to start to think about what are ways in which we want to frame a cultural plan and what are the ways in which we want to create a process by which we explore it, right? So these questions here are going to be, gathered in the breakout room. We've got leaders or we've got people that have volunteered with us to do this. And what would be great is if you have any questions now, we can talk about it briefly. But what Dan is going to do, and the only way to do this is if you all can kind of go into, if you hover over your image and you see your 3 dots, you can go in there and kind of rename yourself. And what would be great is if you want to be, the trouble with all this. If you want to rename yourself, and I'll pick on Susan because she's right in front of me, Susan Bursler, you know, comma, public art. What will then happen is that Dan will then assign you to a breakout room. And within that breakout room, you guys are going to be discussing public art as it relates to some of these types of questions here, right? And then what we'll do is we'll come back after about 20 minutes and then come back, and then whoever's leading these will then sort of do a report out. And again, it's kind of like thinking about what do we want to see in a cultural plan. Do you guys have questions, or do you want to, I don't even know if I can see a chat if I share my screen. But maybe Dan or Kristen, if you have questions, put them in the chat, or are you guys up for this? So is Ava here? I don't know if she's here. Does she want to go come on and just say hello? Okay. Stephanie, are you here?
Yep, I'm here. Thanks, Greg.
Okay. So Stephanie's going to lead the performing arts facilities. Is Rachel Strutt here? She was going to help lead the public art.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. And then Matt was going to do music venues, space, and opportunities. I mean, that's a little broad, but I think Matt's here. I just saw him. And then production and dissemination. Heather was going to help lead it, but also Kristen, I think, is going to jump in your room too, Heather, to help post the questions. And if you guys can, once you get your rooms assigned, if you can turn around, I sent you an email. If you can take and copy and paste those questions maybe in the chat, so that way you have them in your breakout. Do you guys have questions? I hear nothing. Are you just waiting on a plan to emerge in your laps? It's done. We can all go home. Thanks.
Let's go.
Is the music venue space and opportunities, is that only about music venues or about all venues?
No, it's more about different types of venues. And I put that in there thinking about spaces, whether we need more, you know, we need more open spaces just to, you know, do performance art, or we were thinking of performance art facilities as something a little bit more, you know, more larger facility based types of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but space doesn't mean like studio space.
It doesn't have to be. It can be.
Okay.
Are there other questions? Do you guys want to rename yourself? I don't see any renames.
Well, renaming does seem to make it complicated when we're trying to identify ourselves. Perhaps if we number them 1 through 5 and people can just add a number to their name, well, you can make the selection in that manner.
I mean, it sounds great, Charles. It's no different than putting, you know, culture next to your name, or performance next to your name, or art next to your name, or music or production next to your name.
Yeah, so Dan should be able to see your full name, and I think if we're ready, we can go into the breakout groups. And if you're having trouble and you want to stick around, you can tell Dan where you want to go, and he will get you in the right room.
How do we go to the breakout rooms?
Hey folks, Webmaster Dan here. So thank you so much for everyone who's renamed themselves. And so I've got the window up here. I've started assigning folks to breakout rooms. I'm about to hit the button that says open all rooms, at which point you'll be moved or have the option to move into a breakout room. Once I get the first wave of people, it'll be a little easier for me, because then I'll just have the people who are left and we can get the stragglers over. So it might take a couple of minutes before everybody's in the breakout room. Also, once you're in the breakout room, you do have the option to come back to the main room at any time. You can ask for my help if you want to move between rooms. After 20 minutes of discussion or so, I'm going to close the room. That's going to start a 60-second timer that's going to tell you, hey, the bar is closing here, and you'll automatically be kicked out after a while. So I'm about to hit open all rooms. And again, just feel free to message me or Kristen or Greg if you need any help.
So are folks back in, or do they, it takes a while to get them back in?
I think everybody's back in.
Okay. Why don't we do this? Why don't we just start? Let's spend like, around 4 minutes and just sort of create levels of highlights that you saw that were coming up in your breakout room in relationship to what people were talking about. And if you want, let's just start with Ava that was in the sort of cultural planning room.
Sure, just to recap the kind of highlights. So we talked about sort of some shared understanding of why a cultural plan, and folks, I think one strong theme was the feeling that artists need more support from the city, but also that it would be helpful to have a sense of priorities or a strategy or a roadmap. We talked a lot about different people and kinds of stakeholders and sectors to make sure to have at the table, including artists who are living and working in Somerville, artists who have left Somerville, different parts of city government, strong interest in having the private sector, including real estate development, at the table. I talked about what it would mean to have a democratic process that has different ways that make sure different people are engaged depending on comfort level and availability and access, and that really wanting to make space for folks who don't already have political or financial power to be heard. And then that the process should have some joy and fun in it, and also accountability. And then that whatever comes out of it have some clear action steps and clear recommendations to make progress on the goals that emerge.
It's great. It's great. And just so you all know, this is being recorded, so hopefully we can get a transcript of all of this too. I don't know who wants to go next. I don't have I could do the screen, but Rachel, do you want to do a report out on public art?
Sure. So I think the group felt that public art in Somerville definitely is a strength. But one interesting point was that looking at public spaces and how during the pandemic, traditionally public spaces are an area for celebration and bringing community together, but now they're more a chance to create more intimate environments, and perhaps that can be a lasting legacy of the pandemic, how to look at public spaces to create more intimate environments to bring people together in a more intimate way. People felt there's good public art in Somerville, but we need more of it. So how can we expand what we already have? I think in terms of some specifics on what we can do to support artists making more art in Somerville, it would be very helpful to partner more closely with the DPW, to have engineers on hand. So when artists have like large site specific things they want to install, that we have engineers who can, help us get through the essential details on how to make it happen. Also looking at issues of insurance, that tends to be an issue that can hold some artists up. And then people really talked about building coalitions and expanding the definition of who stakeholders are when it comes to public art. So again, working more closely with a department like DPW, for example. So it's not just artists asking for more arts, it's other departments. Or somebody else felt strongly about we should partner more with the Somerville High School, who has a great ceramics program, for example. And then there was a lot of talk about how we should partner more closely with developers and builders, and at the ground level, literally and figuratively, so that when a new building or space is created, there's a plan from the get-go to reserve some space for public art. And then one last comment was, how can we also expand our cadre of artists who are making public art? There are some artists who aren't as familiar with making public art, but maybe they could be paired with other artists who have a lot of experience making public art, so we could expand that. And then, people felt really strongly about inclusivity, like how can we include the public to maybe take a role in making public art so they feel ownership and will likely support it and protect it more. So I think those were some of the key points.
That's great. That's great. Matt, do you want to talk about the breakout with the spaces and music?
Unmute. Yeah. So we had a wide-ranging conversation. It was interesting, and we started off with this notion that space right now is both an asset and a deficit because we're stuck at home. That's very complicated. And throughout, I heard of concern for how to activate space, indoor space, outdoor space, space between buildings, as well as virtual space as well. So in that connection, there's a lot of concern for so much private space being locked down right now, run by landlords, maybe in the city, that's keeping it empty. We all named spaces that we're shocked that are not open right now for use. And how can we as a group sort of work with developers, landlords, the city to open up and activate those spaces, spaces between buildings, public spaces, including, and also large venues for public use again. And that actually shifted for us to think about how one way to activate those spaces is to concern for how information flows from around those. So how do we, even before COVID, it was hard to know what was happening in different places around Somerville, how to make them successful. I think going forward, it's going to be more and more important to sort of keep an eye on the information flow. And that led actually a number of people in the breakout to talk about sort of a renewed role for maybe an art czar or some AMP or some really deliberate effort to publicize all events distinct from the role of the Arts Council in publicizing its own events. So anyway, there's a lot of different ways to think about space and how to activate space.
Matt, can I add something?
Yeah, I hope I did justice.
No, yeah. I mean, there was talk about that as part of the city plan, there could be established, and from my perspective at least, should be established in city government, at least a person or two who helps with that sharing of information and providing information about it could be permits, it could be what's going on where, but for the city to really at this point invest in helping artists get the information that they need to do their art, as well as for people to find what's happening in the city.
Great. Well, why don't we, thanks both of you. Do you want to, Stephanie, do you want to talk a little bit about facilities, more larger sort of facility issues?
Sure. We had a small group. It was just myself and Callie Chapman, who's a choreographer and dancer, and Joe Lynch, who's the board chair over at the Somerville Media Center. And, I felt it was necessary just to do an initial mapping of, just to start listing, well, what are our performing arts facilities? And so, of course, we listed the Center for Arts at the Armory, the Somerville Theater. We included Once, Rockwell Theater, and then there's some other venues that can double. So sometimes Somerville Media Center might be used as a performing arts facility. The Somerville Museum, there's the East Somerville Community Center. I don't know what the plans are for Somerville High School, if that's going to have a performing arts space or not. Then, there's outdoor spaces, certainly, Art Farm, it wouldn't necessarily be a facility, so to speak, but I think we just wanted to create an inventory as to where performing arts is happening in the city. We did talk a lot about churches and the potential for I guess you could call it mixed use for similar, for those of you who are familiar with Jose Mateo Ballet Theater, close to Harvard Square, and what the potential is there for, kind of double use as a performing arts facility. So we talked about parks that are often used for performances as well. We yeah, I think the three of us were certainly consider ourselves dance advocates, and we did talk a bit about dance and really just the lack of adequate space for dance in Somerville. And so Callie talked about the need for really a dedicated and accessible space for dance, and something that has potential for modularity, something that is easily transformable for different disciplines. You know, so that you don't have to, like, you know, bring in a floor, a dance floor each time you want to, you know, you're going to have dance in the space. So those are some of the things that we discussed. We talked, you know, a little bit about the Center for Arts at the Armory and the fact that how much potential there is there, and that actually that needs almost its own strategic plan to really be leveraged as the asset that it could really be in the Somerville's arts ecosystem. And, you know, we know that there are some zoning issues and that needs to be addressed. We also need investment so that we can attract really high caliber performing groups and artists, and really have actually that high quality to serve the entire community, because I think the entire community deserves that access. And I think that's, I don't know, Callie and Joe, feel free to chime in anything that I might have missed, but we certainly need, you know, we definitely need investment. We need to be inclusive and accessible, and you know, a lot of work that needs to be done.
May I add one more point, which one of somebody in our group just messaged me, which is an important one, is that it's great that the development there's an overlay district in Union Square for 5% for art, but in general, we should be pushing for 1% for art program citywide, and with all developers, not just to create new art, but also for art, public art preservation.
Cool. Does Kristen or Heather want to talk about their meeting?
So do you want to go, or would you like me to? Maybe I will, because it seems like maybe she's on her phone, or she's on her phone, and maybe it's giving her some trouble. So assets that we talked about around in thinking about production versus dissemination is that there's so many artists who are creating amazing work, and there's these large studio spaces, and there is development happening, which has potentially the opportunity to create more space for artist uses. But the deficit is that there are few galleries and there's limited performance venues. But one of the most major deficits is the high rent for living for apartments. And that means that it's difficult for artists to stay here as residents. Studio spaces are more affordable across the board, not in every cases, but studio spaces are in high demand. There's more demand than supply and can be vulnerable. Like Joy Street was just sold and Artisans Asylum is leaving. So related to that, one of the things that is missing is more affordable housing for artists. And we talked about looking maybe like co-op models, including co-op models for galleries or other workspace. But the artist housing should have artist tie-ins with the development. So have a gallery in the space, workspace, or other embedded infrastructure like dark rooms or things like that. And there should be sufficient space in the units to actually do work. And then we asked the question, what are good models to emulate both here in Somerville, but also elsewhere? And if anyone from my group has anything to add, please chime
in. This is great. I mean, the one thing that I think is interesting in this exercise is that you guys immediately started diving into, and I think this says a lot about how artists think, as sort of, you know, looking at sort of what assets are and then what the needs are, and sort of weaving in between what can, you know, what do I have at my disposal to create something, and then what do I know I need to create something more. I mean, I think that's a unique asset in and of itself of the arts community. And if you think about too, like on a cultural planning process, to me, I mean, the one thing I heard a lot about was issues of access, issues of equity. I think if we go about like in this planning process, like that, one of the first meetings that we'll have is to say, how are we making sure reaching people that typically wouldn't even come to this meeting, right? So, I mean, all of this is the kinds of things that I think what's going to happen is that your own exploration in this in 20 minutes is, helping to frame it, helping to think about it. Hopefully that you'll participate, later on when we launch this. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about and we've thought about doing a poll is thinking about, do you hire some outside consultant and, they come in and maybe it's the whole thing as a formulaic process, or how much can we do this on a ground level, with, our existing staff and maybe hire outside people to help facilitate. But it's much more of a, a homegrown type of thing. To me, I think that would be a really exciting way of doing it. It's just a matter of that, we as a community are really going to have to, decide how we are going to be able to participate. But I mean, the whole point of tonight was really just to, one, to kind of state that, the city of the Arts Council is committed to doing this. And two, start to get, feedback from you all about, what are the different ways in which we're going to process this? What are the different types of topics we know are going to come up? So essentially, that's kind of what this is about. And I'll sort of come back to our slides here. But does anybody have any questions about kind of the intent of what we were trying to do here, or are there any other questions that you guys might have arised or think about? I think COVID is going to play a huge issue in this, and I think we've got to figure this out. Like, maybe we start off with doing more survey issues. I mean, one of the meetings I was in is like, how to find people that aren't necessarily coming to the meetings. And truth be told, maybe that's where we start off in a process during COVID, is really diving into like, not even the folks like you that, have access to a meeting, but how do we reach people that can't get to a meeting through COVID? So those are some of my thoughts, and more than likely we can hopefully, keep this going over the winter too.
Greg, one thing that was brought up, I was sorry, I was muted, I didn't know, was also utilizing the economic development resource a little bit more. And one artist wanted to start their own gallery space as a positive thing. And I think if that is more known how to be able to do that, I think that would also help kind of strengthen our assets.
Right. Do you guys?
Greg, can I jump in here for just 1 second?
Sure.
One thing I would, it's glaring to me because of something else I do in the city, that there are no restaurants on this call. I mean, am I missing some restaurant folks? They employ a lot of musicians and a lot of artists. And I guess what's glaring to me is there's no cross feed between the Arts Council and the restaurant industry. They're the ones who employ a lot of musicians. So I would just put that out there, that you might want to reach out to the chamber or Jess Willis, who's head of the nightlife, dining and nightlife, and see if you can pull in some of those musicians into your conversation.
May I also speak to something that's happening in Gilman Square? There's a new neighborhood association. Nancy Anderson knows about this too, that we have, as a community at Mad Oyster, begun attending the neighborhood association meetings because of the amount of development that's happening around our building. And we're finding out how much we mean to the community around us, but also in a way that association is helping us make bridges to people we wouldn't necessarily connect with. So the neighborhood associations, I don't know how many there are in Somerville, but I think they're a powerful tool for making connections that the arts don't necessarily connect with.
I was saying it's a great point. And I don't think, I mean, to Joe, that this went out kind of like to the typical, went out on our listserv, went out on our Facebook. I mean, I've got separate meetings with people around music and permitting issues, but in terms of, like this forum was pretty much directed to the arts community. But one would assume that, as we move forward, folks in economic development are going to be brought into the planning process, the business community. I mean, we should have a separate meeting just on, local businesses and arts, local, music venues. I mean, we really could have one on neighborhood, associations and the arts community. And it'd be interesting to look at it in a topical type of thing or an association type of thing. Maybe we bring a meeting specifically with, churches and have church leaders there and have church leaders and the artist community. So we could break it down into that type of categories. And then from that, talk about issues of public art. What does public art mean to a church? What does, performance space mean to a church? I mean, the one thing that's interesting is I know over the years that, years and years ago, just because I worked with somebody in Boston and they said, oh, well, I'm a member of this church and they would love to have you guys do things. And out of that, the Nave Gallery came about. And it was just that sort of opportunity really from me knowing somebody that was, a parishioner in that church. Right. So those are great thoughts and great comments.
On the other thing, Greg, like in Cambridge, right in White Place over, there was a vacant storefront and they had a craft market there. What I've been noticing, unfortunately due to COVID, is there's a lot of empty storefronts. Do we have opportunities to be able to have artists sell work in some of those empty storefronts when we are able to?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, this is sort of helping us frame this. There's not much more to say. That we're going to have another, one of these town hall meetings with the mayor, I think in December, where we should start. I mean, I think Kristen and I and probably our board and staff are going to start to frame what, this is going to look like. We'll know a little bit more about, what potentially, if there's CARES Act money coming in, we'll learn a little bit more about, what other types of funding we can potentially get. Hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about where we are in terms of our phases of COVID, right? So those are the kinds of things that we're probably going to end up discussing in December. But there is an expectation that the mayor is going to be at this next meeting in December. So, and what we can do is I can work with Dan. I think we can get some type of transcript hopefully from this. I'm pretty positive that we can extract some of it. And then at least the reporting back section, which would be great. I don't know if you were leaders, if you left, if you took notes, why don't you hold on to those notes for us? And if you want, you don't necessarily need to transcribe them. If you want, just take a picture of them, create a PDF. Typically there's a pro app that you can take a picture and converts into a PDF. And if you can, just send it to me, or I'll reach out to you. But that's pretty much it. And again, I would say, look out for the grants that are out there, especially for the individuals. The LCC grants are out there. And I think you guys all know how to reach us. But I do want to say thank you. And, we had around 40 people in attendance here, which was great. I just want to thank you all for your time.
Greg, is there a date for the December meeting or not yet?
I think that we did set it up. I would have to look. I think it's the one thing too that we had talked about is potentially, I know this was in our other group session, of maybe creating a listserv specifically around, or what we could do is create a separate Facebook page if we wanted to, that's specific around sort of cultural planning or infrastructure, where we can disseminate information that's very specific to this whole process, right? I'd have to look at my notes. I can't remember. I feel like it's December 9th, but I can't swear upon that.
Greg, I just looked at my calendar and what I have is December 8th.
8th, yeah.
At 6:30, Lynn also put it in the chat. Thanks for that, Lynn.
Thanks. So I'm going to stop sharing. So I think that's it.
Greg, I was just going to say that I think it would be a great idea if we could do some kind of listserv or Google group or Facebook thing, because a lot of the people that I sent out all those emails to late this afternoon, mid-afternoon, didn't have a clue that this was even happening. So I think being able to figure out a way to get the word out to more people would be to our advantage.
Yep. No, I agree.
And maybe if everyone at this meeting invited one person who wouldn't typically come to such a meeting for the next meeting.
Yeah.
That-
And I mean, without pitching it, but I mean, we have a pretty active, between our staff, the Somerville Arts Council's Facebook page. I think many of you are on the Facebook page, so go and, like or follow our page. We've been posting about this for a while, so a little bit, so I mean, it's this ongoing issue of dissemination and how people know what's going on. So, but thank you all, and I have to get to another meeting.
Okay. I want to take an opportunity to thank Kristen in the city, who has been an advocate for us, and thank her for all the work she's doing for this community, and hope that maybe you can become the arts advocate in the city, because if art needs to be within city government for it to really have a strong place in the community, in my mind. So.
No, I agree. And that's partly why I enjoy my work with Greg and the Arts Council so much. So thanks for having me in this meeting. It's been really wonderful.
Yep.
Thank you.
And Kristen, thank you so much for taking part in the group.
Thank you for not eating your dinner, Kristen, and taking part. And thank you everybody for joining, and have a great night.
And Dan, thanks for making it so smooth.
Yes.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Great.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
And thank you, Kristen.
Thanks to you, Heather. Appreciate
Yeah.
your facilitation.